They threw my life onto the curb and changed the locks while I was at a doctor's appointment. Photographs face down in rain, tools I'd use to build their future sinking in puddles. Then my own son looked past me as his wife said, "You're no longer needed here." That sentence didn't just bruise, it broke something clean. In the next 3 days, I learned how silence, paper, and a steadier hand can turn a lockout into a reckoning, and a father's heartbreak into a line he'll never let anyone cross again. Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're watching from. And as you watch, don't just sit back, be part of the experience. If a moment grabs your attention, whether it's powerful, unexpected, or deeply moving, drop a comment with a timestamp of that scene and share your thoughts. Your reactions bring the story to life, and we love seeing which moments resonate with you the most. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, grab a coffee or tea, settle in, and let's begin. I keep the porch light on a soft amber the way my late wife liked it, not because I expect company, but because a house ought to look like it's waiting for someone. In Asheville, the evening air smells of wet pine and motorcycle exhaust, and the Blue Ridge throws a dark shoulder against the sky by 8. My Craftsman sits quiet on a narrow lot, the main house in front and the garage apartment tucked like a pocket behind it, both under the grip of an HOA that measures grass height like blood pressure. I am Raymond Carter, Ray to anyone who doesn't sell me insurance. 66 and retired from a lifetime of wrenching on school buses. A mechanic's habits don't retire, they pivot. I still label coffee tins with masking tape, still keep receipts sorted by month, still log the serial numbers of my tools in a notebook that knows my hands better than any pair of gloves. I arrange my mornings by torque and my nights by silence. Logan, my son, and Kara, his wife, live in the main house to look after me. That's the phrase Kara used when she carried in her ring light and a pyramid of plastic bins, all pastel and glossy with ambition. She sells furniture, knickknacks, and the dream of taste to strangers online. Logan floats between jobs like dandelion fluff, landing here and there, then moving on before anything takes root. I occupy the garage apartment and the trust occupies the deed. The Carter Homestead Trust is a neat lattice of paper that says I am still the one who decides what shelter means. Coffee is black and unashamed in this house. I drink it at the workbench beneath a pegboard of wrenches that catch morning light like silver fish. The bench smells of old varnish and warm solder. I repair what other people give up on. Cassette decks whose belts have gone soft, mantel clocks that lost their patience, ladder-back chairs with loose joints. Saturdays, I load whatever I've rescued into the bed of my pickup and drive to the Smoky Park Flea Market, more for conversation than cash. Value is a funny gauge. People think it's price, but I measure it in eye contact. The neighborhood watches itself with cameras and small mercy. Ring doorbells blink like mechanical eyelids, and next door hums with polite suspicion, a chorus of "Did anyone hear?" and friendly reminder. The HOA mails out reminders in bold font and friendly tone, and I file them in a manila folder labeled with a date and a sigh. I don't mind rules, I mind rules that forget people happen. 3 years since Martha passed. Her photograph lives in a wooden frame beside the garage window, the grain soft as a thumbprint. She used to say a home should have a hum to it, not noise, just the honest working sound of a life. I try to keep that hum going. In the main house, the hum is different now. Packaging tape squeal, ring light buzz, the whisper of Kara's voice performing for 1,000 little squares on a screen. Health is not a straight road. The VA clinic tells me to lift less, stretch more. Respect the shoulder, the nurse said, tapping the joint like it might answer back. I comply in my way, more pauses, fewer heroics. I have a pill sorter the color of Skittles and a willingness to live past my pride. I write reminders on index cards, and clip them to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a wrench. Paper is the quiet engine under my roof. In a steel file cabinet by my desk sit the trust agreement, the deed records, tax receipts, insurance policies, and the tidy map of everything I've built. I keep scanned copies on a USB thumb drive that rides in my pocket beside a brass Zippo I haven't lit in 20 years. If a storm came and flattened the lot, I could still point to what was mine and why. Gratitude travels a shorter circuit in this house than it used to. Logan says thanks, Dad, when a faucet stops whining, then disappears into the glow of a screen. Kara's politeness is a porcelain cup, thin, pretty, and easy to chip. She will compliment my skill and remind me of HOA guidelines in the same breath. We want the place to look curated, she said once, sweeping a hand at the porch like it was a showroom. I nodded because I know how to pick my battles. Evenings, I walk the neighborhood's loop, the slope steady, the view honest. I pass yards where wind chimes admit to the wind and dogs confess to the moon. I count steps until my knees vote no. Then I turn home. The porch light greets me like a patient friend. I sit on the top step and rub the oil-stained rag I keep in my back pocket, a habit from days when salt and metal defined my hours. There is a language of small changes that a house speaks. The new smell of a front door lock. The way the Wi-Fi network name shifts when someone resets a router. The stack of HOA flyers rising faster than usual. I read these like a mechanic listens to an engine. Something can run and still be wrong. The main house runs, but lately it runs loud, and I am learning to hear the difference between sound and warning. On my bench, the garage clock ticks slightly fast, an honest flaw I never corrected. It keeps me early and reminds me that time is a tool until it isn't. I underline dates in my ledger: tax paid, policy renewed, title certified. These are not grand gestures. They are the little bolts you tighten to keep the wheel on. Sometimes I tell myself the simplest story. Family is where you return. At other times, I feel a hairline crack in that truth, a line running under paint that you know is there even if no one else sees it. I press my thumb to the frame of Martha's photograph and wait for the hum to come back. It does, but softer now, like a radio drifting out of reception. I listen anyway. A man can fix a lot of things. He can even rebuild trust on paper. It is the other kind he can't fix alone. I came in on the end of a sentence, the way you catch a misfire more by feel than sound. Kara's voice was low and sanded smooth, the kind she uses when she wants to be overheard without being accountable. Name on deed, quit claim, clean title for resale. Floated and snapped shut the second my hand touched the refrigerator handle. Logan closed a cabinet with exaggerated quiet and stared past my shoulder. I took my water, nodded, and waited out the silence. Kara pivoted like a showroom hostess. She started talking about HOA trash schedules, curb appeal, porch clutter, a list of tiny disciplines that pretended to be conversation. The words were household feather dusters. The tone was a socket wrench. I let them pass and logged the mismatch. People tell you what matters by how hard their voice grips it. That night, the neighborhood app sprouted a careful complaint. Noise from power tools after quiet hours? A 7-second ring clip accompanied it, just grinder sound and a rectangle of light that looked a whole lot like my bench lamp. The reflection on a basement window gave away the camera's angle. Inside our sight line, not across the street. Replies stacked up with links to bylaws. Nobody tagged me. At dawn, I tested the front door. The knob was the same. The cylinder wasn't. A key reads metal the way a palm reads a handshake, and this one had the short temper of new brass. Logan breezed by with a settler's smile. HOA recommended upgrades, he said. The family hook held every spare key but this one. I jotted the brand and cylinder code in my pocket notebook and felt the first tooth of something catch. By lunch, the utility portal confirmed the electric and water contacts had been updated for convenience. The bills still drafted from the trust account, but the dashboard now displayed Kara as primary contact, me as secondary. Screenshots went into a folder named, in my private humor, housekeeping. Paper is a tide. If you don't mark the posts, the shoreline moves. Logan hovered in the garage mid-afternoon and asked if I'd considered decluttering the old projects, because staging content needed clean sightlines. He framed it as safety and aesthetics. It landed like a small eviction notice from my own bench. I said I'd think about it. I did not. Over coffee, he floated a sermon on freedom. You could sell some assets and enjoy life, he said, watching my face the way people watch a weather report. Paperwork could be simplified if... He let the sentence die. I stirred sugar I do not take just to hear the spoon knock the cup. In the evening, I opened the steel cabinet and laid out my life the way a medic lays out tools. Trust agreement, abstract of title, tax receipts, insurance declarations, HOA bylaws tabbed and dated. I checked seals and notaries, ran flat hands over the emboss like Braille. I scanned fresh copies to the USB and a clean SD card, then wrote hash codes on an index card. The cabinet closed with its honest bark of metal. I texted Marvin, kept it neutral. Need elder law counsel's number just in case. He sent me attorney Nora Whitfield's contact and added, put everything in writing. I drafted a one-line email to Nora, left it in drafts. Paper before voice. Dinner announced itself with the thud of a salad bowl. Kara slid it to my place with a smile practiced under a ring light. You should relax, Ray. Everything's already arranged. I speared a tomato and asked, arranged how? She smiled wider and arranged her silence. Logan chewed like a metronome. The sentence sat under my chair like a tack. After dishes, I inventoried the garage apartment like a man reading weather on a long drive. Meds counted and packed. Martha's photo wrapped in a clean shop rag, the tool roll with the essentials. A change of clothes, spare reading glasses, small cash, the USB. I slid the canvas tote behind the door where my hand would find it in the dark. Dusk brought the HOA patrol car nosing past like it had a question it didn't want answered. A neighbor's blind tilted and stayed. Ring LEDs blinked along the block like a string of tiny red eyes. I wrote the time in my pocket notebook. Patterns matter. Impressions lie because they're in a hurry. Inside me, the torque came up. I didn't accuse and I didn't plead. I let the bolt meet its spec. People love to tell you family is feeling. I have learned that family is also paperwork and keys and who can change the locks while keeping a straight face. The house still hummed, but I could tell the pitch was climbing. An engine can run and be wrong at the same time. I set my jaw to the frequency and waited for the next noise to name itself. I checked my pocket for the thumb drive, felt its small heat against the brass Zippo, and counted breaths to 10 the way I used to before turning a stubborn bolt free. The mountain storm hit fast. A slate curtain dropped across Henderson as if someone yanked a cord. Wipers clicked like a metronome on the slow setting, steady and patient, while the VA's adhesive ECG dots itched beneath my shirt. The curb in front of the house looked wrong from half a block away. Wrong shape, wrong color, the kind of wrong a mechanic recognizes the way a farmer reads clouds. A small, jumbled hill leaned against black trash bags, breathing in the rain. I idled at the gutter and saw my coats first, the oilskin folded like a fallen tent. Then the tool crates, yellow latches beaded with water, labels I printed in block capitals running into blurry ghosts. A wooden box sat open, letters of my wife puffed with damp like rising bread. The mantel clock I'd been coaxing back to life lay on its side, the bezel lifted, the brass face polka-dotted with rain. I cut the engine and listened to the storm's clean insistence. I went to the pile the way you go to a stalled car, eyes first, hands later. Serial numbers stared back from the tool cases, a kind of roll call. On the radio's faceplate, rain formed neat beads, then merged and ran in shallow rivers across the dial. I slid Martha's wedding photo from a shallow puddle, blotted it against my sleeve, and felt the backing swell under my fingers. The glass had taken a hairline crack from corner to corner, a fault line right through her smile. I told myself facts. Wood swells, paper dries, cracks don't heal. The gate latch resisted. The front knob felt familiar. The cylinder did not. My key tested the pins, skittered, and returned a clean refusal. New brass has a taste. Sharp, unoxidized, and it coated my tongue as if I'd chewed a penny. Rubber soles squeaked on the wet concrete. Cold air licked the cuff of my jeans. I tried again, gentler than firmer, confirming what I already knew. The door and I no longer spoke the same language. Logan filled the doorway like a question mark, shoulders curved, eyes not finding mine. Kara hovered behind him, arms folded so tight her knuckles showed bone. "We need space," Logan said, voice trained to be neutral. "Maybe take a motel for a while." Kara's mouth made a courteous shape that never reached her eyes. "You're no longer needed here," she said, each word ironed flat. "Eviction notice prepared. If you try to force entry, I'll call the police." I kept my hands down and my breath slow. "The property belongs to the Carter Homestead Trust," I said, even and low. "I'm the trustee." Kara lifted a shoulder. "Trust or not," she said, "this isn't working." Logan blinked at the jam as if the grain might rescue him. I noted the line, the posture, the diction. Feelings can be argued, facts get filed. Across the street, a curtain shrugged and stayed at a slant. An HOA patrol car drifted by like a duck in a current, pretending not to stare. Ring lenses glowed along the block, tiny watchfires in the rain. I could feel the neighborhood's math. One old man, one pile of life, one silence wide enough to park a truck in. Being witnessed isn't the same as being seen. It felt like standing in a lab while the instruments hummed and nobody wrote anything down. I took out my phone and documented. Wide shots to catch the address stones, close-ups to catch the swollen ink on the labels. The new cylinder got its own frame, brand and keyway in focus. Texts from utility providers got captured with timestamps. I pocketed small irreplaceables. The photo, the letterbox, a tin of screws with odd threads I'd collected, then left the larger pieces as they were. Evidence breathes best where it lies. The pickup took what it could take. I stacked the crates I trusted and left the ones that would give way under wet weight. Henderson's Budget Inn knew me only as a name, a card, and a preference for a ground floor near the ice machine. The room smelled like bleach and old television. Fluorescent hums set the tempo. Thin towels did what they could. I spread my things on the small table. Meds in their candy colors, Martha's photo face up on a folded shirt, notebook and pen, the USB like a key that opens only one door. The canvas tote zipper rasped as I unpacked the file. Trust agreement, tax receipts, insurance declarations. I took fresh pictures of each page in case the scans failed me and mirrored everything to the USB. The index card with hash codes went into the wallet behind the license. I listed a morning sequence. Call attorney Nora Whitfield, text Marvin, freeze non-essential autopays, visit the bank to change alerts, buy a burner SIM, open a P.O. box. Grief walked in on wet shoes and stood at the foot of the bed. I did not ask it to leave and did not pull out a chair. I slid Martha's photo into the warm space under the lamp, eased the backing flat, and let the glass crack be what it was. Function first, then feelings. I wrote one line in the notebook. They chose their method. I will choose my response. The period felt like a rivet catching clean. The AC rattled in a rhythm I recognized, a lazy idle on an old V8 that just needs a turn of the screw. I lay on the coverlet and did the VA shoulder stretches by the numbers. Slow reach, measured breath, no heroics. Shoes went by the door, laces looped open for quick exit. The USB stayed in my pocket, a small, hard reassurance against the brass Zippo. The phone went to airplane mode so somebody else's panic couldn't borrow my pulse. Rain softened to a steady scrub. I listened for catastrophe and heard only plumbing. The motel's thin curtains made their own weather, breathing in when the AC kicked, relaxing when it sighed. Quiet has gears, you can feel it upshift when you stop arguing with it. I turned the lamp low and rehearsed the next day out loud once, like torque specs before a job. The porch scene kept playing behind my eyes, but the camera angle had changed. Now the frame included timestamps, cylinder codes, and the way Kara's jaw clenched when I said trustee. I set an early alarm and slid the notebook under the phone so I'd have to lay a hand on the plan to silence the ring. Proof before speeches, process before rage. I let the AC idle. I let my breathing match it. And for the first time that day, something obeyed. The motel room was the color of early fog, a gray that softened edges and made paper look important. I packed the canvas tote with my documents and drove to Biltmore Avenue while the city was still stretching awake. Attorney Nora Whitfield's office was quiet in the way of places that trust deadlines. Framed certificates made a careful grid behind reception, and the printer smell of warm toner sat in the air like a faint promise. I set the trust binder and folders on her conference table as if laying out tools for a precise job. Trust agreement, deed abstract, tax receipts, insurance declarations, HOA bylaws. Paper has weight. Today it steadied me. Nora read like a paramedic works. Pulse first, then protocol. She flipped, tabbed, and summarized without decoration. I learned she had the kind of voice that pulls panic's plug. In her telling, the facts were clean. I am grantor and trustee, the residence is trust property, and the lock change plus curb dump is a colorable wrongful lockout and potential elder abuse under state law. She sketched remedies on a legal pad in a tight hand that looked like it would never lie. Her plan came in 3 steps because the world works better when it can be counted. Step 1. A notice of unauthorized lockout to Logan and Kara, copied to the HOA, demanding restoration of access or compliance on a short fuse. Step 2. Pressure by perimeter. Notify the insurer about the unauthorized lock change. Pause non-essential auto pays the trust carries and move all communication to written-only channels. Step 3. A real estate lever. Line up a realtor for MLS readiness if common sense refuses to show up. She said the word leverage without savor, like a wrench, not a weapon. I signed limited representation and authorization forms, and she photographed my originals with a method that would make a chain of custody nerd weep. Every document came back across the table with a receipt, as if returning a borrowed socket. She told me to keep originals in my possession and to take pictures of every envelope I mailed. I nodded and felt my breathing lengthen to something useful. The morning became a checklist you could hang your hat on. At the bank, I asked for high-friction alerts and set my accounts to bark at every unusual pull. I froze auto pays that didn't keep the lights on. The fraud desk flagged the trust for any credit inquiries, especially those smelling of home equity. Recovery emails and 2-factor authentication moved to addresses I controlled and could prove I controlled. The banker, tired around the eyes, printed confirmations and stapled them straight. A burner SIM went into a cheap phone, the number handwritten on the back of a card I'd only share with counsel and my realtor. A P.O. box at the post office gave legal mail a neutral home that nobody else could intercept. Utilities took longer, call queues do, but I logged agent names, times, and ticket numbers, then followed with emails to make the spoken words stick. Notifications that had quietly drifted to Kara's inbox were tugged back to the trustee address, one form at a time. The insurer's rep listened while I explained the lock alteration and the trust posture, then explained in turn how coverage expects transparency. I sent them a written confirmation, copied Nora, and archived the ticket. Paper before voice, a rule that keeps men like me from saying more than we need to. Marvin's text buzzed at noon to say Jenna Pike could meet me by 2. Jenna looked at the house from the curb with an appraiser's calm and a runner's energy. She liked the lot, the porch lines, the way the neighborhood comped out on her tablet. Exterior photos were doable today. Interior photos would follow once access was formalized. Interest next week was not a promise, just a forecast built from the sky you could see and the radar you couldn't. I appreciated the way she said we when she meant the work. Before we parted, I scheduled a licensed locksmith and asked the county to send a deputy tomorrow morning to stand by while we resecured the garage apartment and documented that the main house remained contested. It wasn't drama, only safe procedure. I called Nora from the sidewalk and gave her the time slot. She said she'd have the notice packet ready to affix and to mail certified the same day. I sent Logan one line, nothing more. You chose your method. I'll choose my response. It wasn't a flourish. It was a timestamp. The phone stayed otherwise quiet in my pocket, which was the point of a burner. Back at the motel, I let logistics settle into order. VA shoulder stretches in the dim room, the AC humming like an engine at idle. I photographed receipts, certified letter slips, and updated the notebook with a numbered list and check marks that felt better than sleep. The canvas tote sat open on the chair like a mouth. I fed it only what had been copied, labeled, and logged. Toward evening, my phone flickered with the kind of storm you don't see on weather maps. Kara's face sat in a square on Facebook, the caption careful, the clip clipped. The video framed me as volatile. A short, sharp montage, my hand at the door, the curb pile in the rain, my mouth set in a line a stranger might call anger. Next door echoed the post with slightly kinder punctuation. Comments began their soft cascade, equal parts pity for her and policy citations for me. A direct message arrived from a name I recognized too late. The kid who used to fall asleep in my third period auto tech class, now a local reporter with a verified checkmark and a steadier spine. She sent a ring clip from a neighbor's vantage, time-stamped and wide. In that angle, the story changed. Kara carrying boxes, the toss to the curb, my arrival minutes later. The sound included her voice and the specific words she had used for me. I felt my jaw harden and then unclench. I forwarded the file to Nora with a note as plain as a shop ticket. She replied with the rule I had already taped inside my head: no online replies, no comments, no public statements. Evidence belongs in the file, not the feed. The truth has a pace, let it run. Night smoothed the day's burrs. I labeled an envelope for Nora in a hand steadier than it had been on Friday and packed tomorrow's stack. Notices, copies, lists, spare pens. The AC kept time I could keep. When I turned off the light, the room did not go dark so much as it went precise. Locks, notices, photos. In the morning, the first lever would move. If you're still here and feeling the weight of what just happened, type number 1 below. It means a lot to know you're following along. Stay with me as we continue. At 8 sharp, the locksmith's van nosed to the curb, white letters beading with last night's rain. A county deputy eased in behind him, lights dark, body cam already winking. The storm had rinsed Henderson clean, but damp halos lingered where my life had sat in bags, circles like stains left by a removed engine. The locksmith shook my hand and asked for ID. The deputy took it too, compared names to the trust certification Nora printed yesterday, and nodded the quiet yes of a man who lets paper do the talking. We started with the garage apartment, the only space I would touch. The locksmith laid out neat tools, plug spinner, picks, new cylinders, like a surgeon arranging bone saws. He explained his steps for the camera, then worked with soft taps and small turns until the plug surrendered. The deputy watched my hands, not because he distrusted them, but because that is how a record protects itself. When the new deadbolt slid home and the strike seated without protest, I felt something inside me return to spec. We took photos, door frame, fresh cylinder, serial number. I wrote time and temperature in my notebook because the truth likes friends. Nora's packet rode in a manila envelope under my arm. The deputy stood by as I taped the notice of unauthorized lockout to the main house door, another copy to the community board at the mailbox kiosk. I photographed the postings with the address stone in frame and a cheap digital watch held beside for redundancy. Certified mail slips went into my wallet with the day's first tiny victory. 2 receipts, 2 tracking numbers, 2 steps that could not be argued with later. The HOA manager arrived on a tidy electric cart and dismounted with contrition already mixed into her smile. She had Nora's letter in hand, unfolded to the paragraph that cited policy against dumping belongings at the curb. "We're hoping there's been a misunderstanding," she said, voice tuned to neighborhood diplomacy. The deputy answered, not unkindly, that ordinances and HOA bylaws agree on curb dumping. The manager glanced at the notice, then promised to log an infraction against the household currently occupying the main house. Neutral is what people call themselves when accountability is in the room. Jenna's hatchback skimmed in, camera bag over her shoulder, hair in a workman's knot. She took exterior shots while the deputy was still present, framing the porch lines, the eaves, the Blue Ridge shoulder rising like a guarantee behind the roofline. "Comps look strong," she said low, eyes on her screen. "I've got a retired couple from Florida, pre-approved, waiting for a window. If we get interior access inside a week, they can move. I authorized her to keep them warm, subject to council's timeline. Leverage moves best when it looks like ordinary business." An email pinged from my insurer. "Unauthorized lock changes must be disclosed. Coverage assumes communication, not surprise." I forwarded the note to Logan and Kara with Nora CC'd and filed it with the day's growing spine of proof. The email was not a threat. It was a shape, one that says risk belongs to those who create it. By late morning, Nora's demand to vacate hit my inbox as a PDF and left her office as certified mail. 10 days for unauthorized occupants to surrender keys and possession, with civil damages spelled in ink that didn't need to be raised to be heard. I printed 2 copies and slid one into the trust binder. The calendar on my phone got a red mark on day 10. Time is a torque value, respect it or shear threads. My phone, mercifully on airplane mode, vibrated against the garage table with the insistence of incoming storms. When I sat and let the world through, messages cascaded. Kara spun from indignation to supplication in 6 texts, each a different weather system. Logan typed shorter things that looked like shame, trying to learn a sentence. I screenshotted everything for Nora, then returned the phone to silence. Replies feed fires, files feed results. The former student who'd sent the ring clip the day before published a clean story. Context restored. The full angle, the full audio, the toss no longer a rumor. Comments tilted toward me, then toward the general subject of elders and property and where lines should live. Nextdoor froze the thread where I had already been judged and moved on. I sent Nora the link, wrote "for file," and went back to the list. Victory laps wear out shoes you'll need later. Just after noon, the bank's fraud desk called the burner, voice careful as a man stepping on ice. An attempted online HELOC against the trust had pinged their alarms the night I found my life in the rain. Their systems blocked it. The IP trail pointed at a device inside the main house. They had logs, timestamps, an internal ticket, and an agent note that used the word mismatch. I requested the event log and a sworn statement, and while the rep read back the address for the P.O. box, my hand wrote steadier than it had since Friday. Nora returned my voicemail almost immediately. "This can be identity theft or forgery," she said, clinical and calm. "We can file a police report now, or you can hold this for settlement leverage." I chose leverage first. "Document and lock it," I said. "If they want mercy, they can meet it in writing." The afternoon was an exercise in operational calm. I photographed the new garage locks from inside and out, then backed up every file to the USB to a small cloud account I keep only for legal things, and to a print packet addressed to Nora. I listed tomorrow's steps: insurer confirmation, Jenna's tentative show window, HOA infraction notice in writing, proof before speeches, process before rage. The engine of the day ran at operating temperature, no misfires. One text stood alone from the others, a short sentence without emojis or excuses. "Dad, I'm sorry." I lost the plot. I printed it and slid the page into the binder. Silence is not cruelty when it protects the path forward. My rule held: every word through counsel, every action through paper. In the quiet of late afternoon, the garage smelled like sawdust and damp concrete, and the new deadbolt clicked with a sound I trusted. I sat at the table, did the VA stretches, and watched the light move across the floor. Levers engaged. Deputy, notice, HOA infraction, insurer warning, demand to vacate, buyer interest, HHELOC evidence. The day had shape, the shape had direction. The direction had my name on it, not as a suspect, not as a ghost, but as a man who knows how to bring an engine back into tune and keep his hands off the throttle once it holds. Nora laid the forked road in front of me like two clean wrenches on a towel. Option A, keep them as tenants under a strict lease, big deposit, written apology, partial reimbursement, zero tolerance, and the understanding that every rule would ring like a bell. Option B, sell the main house, keep life use of the garage, unwind the money knots, let consequences do the teaching patience could not. Either way, paper first, she said. I liked it because it didn't ask me to be young or loud. Jenna's email arrived with the quiet authority of numbers. The CMA was tight, recent sales trending up, days on market down, and the Florida retirees verified with funds and a plan to close in about 3 weeks. If interiors opened within the week, momentum would carry us. Delay invited variables, and variables are how you miss a turn. I read her lines twice. I sat in the garage with Martha's photo dried flat under the lamp. The hairline crack still cut her smile, but the paper held. Her old line walked back into the room. Boundaries are a way to love. I said it once to hear if the truth still fit in my mouth. It did. Stewardship sometimes wears the face of a locked door and a signed deed. Nostalgia is a polishing rag. It is not a bolt. I called Nora and chose option B before the second ring. No speeches. I told her to keep the timeline moving, the demand to vacate clock, the insurer's notice trail, the HOA record, and deputy presence for interior access. She would coordinate with Jenna on showings. When I hung up, the air had a different weight, like a jack finally meeting the frame. Jenna and I spoke next. I authorized her to advance buyer communication subject to counsel's timing. Every packet to every buyer would highlight in bold the life use clause on the garage so there were no myths later. We penciled a tentative show window with the deputy standing by. I would not attend. The house could speak without me. It had been doing that for months. I wrote a note to Logan in my blocky hand on a clean index card and sealed it in a plain envelope addressed to the main house. "I'm still your dad, but I'm not your bank." I photographed the sealed envelope for the file and slid it through the slot. It did not feel like victory. It felt like aligning timing marks on an engine you neglected too long and hearing it come close to true. I asked Nora to draft a small relocation stipend offer one time, contingent on 3X, key surrender, a written apology acknowledging the wrongful lockout, and the clipped video, and vacating within 7 days. Not punishment, a boundary with a door. She sent a clean version within the hour. If they wanted mercy, they could meet it on paper. Jenna coordinated a safety-first show window. The deputy would be in the driveway, buyers with an agent in the hall, doors opened and closed by neutral hands. The listing would state clearly that the property belonged to the trust, turnover was pending, and the garage life use existed. Facts first, feelings parked. I imagined the Florida couple walking the rooms, hearing their own feet on the old floors, seeing a life I no longer needed to defend. That afternoon, I opened the folder with my financial notes and walked the plan Nora had sanity checked. A CD ladder for near-term stability, a muni fund for tax-efficient income, a small emergency cash sleeve for the dense life likes to hand out. Nothing heroic, nothing clever, just ballast. Paperwork calms what apologies can't. I did the VA shoulder stretches against the door jamb and felt the joints stop arguing. A wobble came as the light tilted toward evening. It arrived as a memory. Thanksgiving steam on windows, Martha's pie cooling on the sill, Logan teenage and sheepish asking for the car. The room ached the way a healed bone knows the weather. I let the picture play once, then put it away by reading the demand to vacate and the bank's HELOC attempt log. The pages steadied, the hand nostalgia had loosened. The plan felt right. I slept better for the first time in a week. Alarm set, Jenna's calendar holds, insurer follow-up, Nora's response window to the stipend. In the last minutes before sleep, I listened to the new deadbolt catch and hold, a small sound with unfair meaning. The decision had seated itself in the bones, not floating above them like an idea, but bolted to the frame. Morning would not change it. Morning would only reveal what the choice required next. At 9 sharp, a county deputy idled at the curb while the locksmith unrolled his tools on the hood like a surgeon staging instruments. Damp halos still marked the concrete where my life had sat in bags. I stood at the garage threshold inside my lawful line and let paper speak first. Jenna arrived with a clipboard and a calm that said work, not war. Logan came out of the main house with a ring of keys and a face that couldn't decide what age to be. Kara hovered 2 steps back, jaw set like a clamp. Logan held the keys out to Jenna, not to me. She counted them flatly, each metal tooth clicking against the next, then placed them on a handoff form and had him sign. The deputy logged the time and the count. I kept my hands in my pockets so the moment would sit on paper, not on pride. Kara stared at the notice on the door as if printed paragraphs were grime she could scrub away. Logan found a sentence. "I'm sorry, Dad." The words came bare. I nodded once. Nora's relocation stipend offer had already gone out. Surrender keys, vacate in 7 days, provide a written apology, acknowledging the wrongful lockout, and the clipped video online. Logan signed. Kara shook her head, muttered about an online pile-on, and refused. The deputy made a neutral note and stepped aside. The ring of keys went into Jenna's bag and the house changed tense, from present to pending. With access secured, Jenna walked a quick safety circuit. I stayed at the garage line while the deputy shadowed her through the main house. Cabinets opened and shut, windows latched. Then the camera came out. Jenna worked light and angles until rooms looked like what they were, clean bones ready for someone else's story. She would activate the MLS that evening. The listing would say what the paperwork already said. Trust property, turnover pending, garage, life use reserved. By the next sunset, 2 offers arrived. One was all cash with a 21-day close, the kind of certainty you can fold and put in your pocket. The other was richer by a sliver but married to inspections and lender calendars. I told Jenna to send both to Nora. My pulse already knew which one I could sleep on, but I let counsel run the pencil. The HOA reached my inbox with a formal infraction against the occupants for curb dumping. A private apology followed for assuming the wrong story last week. I didn't ask for a public bow. Consistency is louder than theater. The former student expanded her article into a service piece on elder lockouts, trusts, and why documentation beats volume. My name appeared. I sent Nora the link as an exhibit and went back to tightening my day. Kara flipped her accounts to private and deleted the clip. Nora drafted a retraction and non-disparagement letter with a deadline and a signature line that might save everyone time. That evening, Logan set a wooden box on my step, Martha's letters dried and retied with twine, and said, "I'm sorry, Dad," again, softer. I took the box and said what I believe now. Apologies are clocks. They expire without action. Nora reviewed the offers by noon and recommended certainty. I accepted the all-cash 21-day close. Jenna called with earnest money already wired and an inspection window the buyers would mostly waive. Timeline became dates typed in a column, not wishes on a napkin. The house grew quiet in a way that sounded like relief. I filed the HOA infraction, buyer packets, retraction draft, and the key handover form into the trust binder. Paper has a smell if you've lived with it long enough, ink, toner, a whisper of glue. The garage smelled of sawdust and rain as the mantel clock I'd rescued found a steadier tick. Then the third twist reached Nora's desk. Kara's mother asked to meet, worried for a grandchild. She brought messages showing Kara steering the plan, the attempted HELOC, the talk of a quit claim, the timing while I was gone. She said she would witness if needed. Nora placed the material beside the bank log and drafted terms. Kara would sign a retraction, reimburse a portion of costs, and cease all online disparagement. Paper carved a door where noise had been. I wrote Logan an email and copied Nora. Future contact would run through paper until 3 signs showed up and stayed: counseling attendance, a small repayment plan on what I carried, and a clean run of no drama. The last line said, "I'm still your father." It read simply because it was true. By nightfall, the process hummed without speeches. Keys surrendered. MLS live. Offer sorted. Legal letters moved through their routes like mail after a storm. I sat by the garage window and listened to rain comb the eaves. The new order wasn't soft, but it was fair, and it was quiet. I set the binder on the table, nudged the clock a minute closer to true, and let the small click of the deadbolt catching mean what it meant. Tomorrow would arrive on schedule, and I would meet it with paper, not noise. Jenna ran the inspection like a nurse taking vitals, efficient, calm, no speeches. The buyers had already waived most contingencies, so the checklist was short. GFCI outlets tested, attic hatch popped and shut, HVAC breathed on command, water heater numbers photographed. The buyer's agent carried a clipboard and a pen with the focus of someone who's been burned before. In the dining room, she read aloud the clause I'd asked Jenna to push to the front of every packet, then wrote a neat check mark beside it. Garage life use, reserved to me, acknowledged and accepted. Paper made a small, satisfying sound when it slid into her folder. Back at Nora's office, we tuned the future: a living will, durable power of attorney, healthcare proxy. 3 instruments that replaced hope with instructions. I signed my name with a steady hand and watched the witnesses sign theirs. The trust amendment went last, the no contest clause like a seatbelt that only becomes a story when it isn't there. Nora made the practical sacred. Notarization stamps clean, copies collated, scan archive routine completed before I stood up. A man leaves the office stronger when paper becomes weatherproofing. Identity doesn't defend itself. At home, I opened a password manager and rotated every key like a mechanic replacing belts on a schedule. Recovery codes printed, sealed, and stored in a folder marked Red File. I enrolled in identity monitoring, set alerts for new credit pulls, closed old back doors I'd left propped open for convenience. The Red File sat beside the trust binder by evening, a step-by-step map for a storm that might never come but would find me ready if it did. Numbers calm what apologies cannot. I implemented what Nora had sanity checked: a 3-rung CD ladder, maturities staggered so cash flow wouldn't care about weather, a muni bond fund for quiet income, an emergency sleeve that I promised not to raid to solve other people's friction. Yields and dates went on a single page I taped inside the binder, the way you keep torque specs where your hands already know to reach. I could feel my breathing align with columns and rows instead of moods and memories. Contact needed rules. I typed them like commandments I intended to obey. Email only, CC Nora on anything substantive. No calls after 6, paper, or it didn't happen. I printed and pinned the list to the corkboard above the bench. It wasn't a dare. It was a promise to myself to keep the road between my heart and my handwriting clear of sudden weather. Then I wrote to Logan. The email took time because it had to carry weight without nails. Reconciliation is possible if 3 signs persist, I said. Counseling attendance documented, a modest repayment plan toward the burdens I carried, and a stretch of no drama proved by time, not wish. I drew the line between feelings and behaviors and kept it bright. One sentence carried what I wanted him to remember. I won't negotiate feelings. I will negotiate acts. When the paper was put away and the house had returned to its normal hum, I drove the Blue Ridge Parkway to remind myself what distance looks like. I stopped at an overlook, set Martha's dried photo on the hood, and spoke into the quiet. The firs answered with their soft needle hiss, and the valley offered up a blue that had nowhere else to be. Boundaries are not walls when your hands built them, they're railings on a steep trail. I left the overlook with the hum in my chest steadier than it had been in months. The former student offered a TV interview, her email kind and professional, the angle respectful. I thanked her and declined. The article had done its work as a guide. It didn't need to audition for a stage. I forwarded the exchange to Nora so the file understood what I was not chasing. Order beats audience. The older I get, the easier it is to tell those two apart. Marvin pointed me to a church downtown and a nonprofit that pairs older hands with busted household items. Saturday morning, I tightened cabinet hinges for a woman who'd been fighting them for years and replaced a lamp cord that had been held together by fear and tape. People paid what they could. Most paid in stories. A boy watched me reattach a toaster spring like it was a magic trick and high-fived me when it clicked. The garage smell of solder and coffee followed me home like a friendly dog. I spent the afternoon closing loops. Old autopays were canceled, forwarding at the P.O. box confirmed, archival envelopes labeled for closing day, wire instructions, settlement statement, buyer's warranty deed copy, HOA letters, retraction acknowledgement. I added an index in my notebook, page numbers aligned with binder tabs, so future me would never be forced to hunt when time, or memory, ran narrow. Nora's email landed just after 5. Kara had signed the retraction and the non-disparagement letter, accepted the small stipend, and delivered a private apology with a timestamp and a witness. The attempted HELOC evidence would stay in reserve, documented and dormant. I felt no victory, only architecture, load-bearing and quiet. Some bridges are designed to hold weight without anyone noticing they're doing it. Night gathered its edges around the garage. I laid out tomorrow's clothes like a man preparing for a trip he intends to complete. Clean shirt, paperwork folder, a pen that doesn't leak, reading glasses I could trust under bad lighting. I oiled the mantel clock, felt the train catch and run smooth, and let that honest tick pull the week's burrs flat. The phone went face down on the table, alarm set for schedule, not dread. The deadbolt offered its small consent when I checked it once, then once again for luck I don't believe in. I turned off the desk lamp and watched the room adjust. The outlines remained even as the light retreated. The bench, the binder, the red file, and I took comfort in the truth that tomorrow had a shape you could draw. I would go to closing, sign where lines told me to sign, and walk out with a future that didn't depend on anyone else's promises to behave. The quiet wasn't empty. It was full of the calm that comes when a plan replaces a plea. Somewhere outside, a train crossed town speaking in long vowels. Inside, the clock kept time for both of us. Closing day felt like a choreography I already knew. Stand here, sign there, breathe in between. The title company spread its calm under fluorescent light. A carafe of coffee steamed beside a tray of pens that had never missed a stroke. The escrow officer introduced herself in a voice tuned to reduce blood pressure and slid the settlement statement across the table. I read each line, then the wire instructions, then the owner's affidavit. The garage life use addendum waited under a yellow tab. I touched the paper like a carpenter taps a stud. Funds were already verified in escrow. I signed without hurry and initialed where small flags requested it. Copies emerged from the printer, collated and stamped, and went into a tidy envelope that made the whole day suddenly portable. Jenna arrived with the buyers, a retired couple from Florida whose hands looked like they'd earned their rings. He wore a short-sleeved shirt with a tan line that made sense. She had reading glasses on a cord and questions that were practical, not nervous. We shook hands like neighbors who intend to keep their word. The deputy wasn't needed, but he waited on standby by phone, a quiet boundary in my pocket. Keys passed from Jenna's palm to theirs, and the room exhaled. We spoke briefly about quiet hours and mailbox boundaries, about the garage's separate world and the clean line the addendum drew. They said they appreciated the bones of the place and the clarity of the arrangement. Businesslike, cordial, human. A banker's text blinked. Wire received. The trust account had its breath back. I opened the binder at the green tab labeled Closing and slid the packet in. Numbers followed their map. 60% moved toward the CD ladder I had already scheduled, 30% to the Muni Fund built for quiet, 10% remained as emergency cash that would not be confused with generosity. Relief didn't leap, it landed. I wrote the final figures in my ledger and felt how steadiness works better than celebration. Outside, the main house changed tense. The buyers' movers arrived with pads and dollies, and the street watched without heat. The HOA pushed a neutral welcome note and updated its records to list me at the garage unit under life use. The curb where my belongings had once soaked up a storm now held a flowering planter, something green that did not apologize. I noticed the symmetry and let it pass. Nora texted to confirm the last legal thread had tied. Kara's signed retraction sat in the file with the non-disparagement and a partial cost reimbursement that wouldn't fix history but acknowledged it. The attempted HELOC materials remained documented and dormant. Her memo closed the active matter in 6 plain words. All conditions satisfied, monitor only. I took the memo the way a mechanic takes the final test drive and listens to the engine do exactly what it should, no more. Logan's email followed an hour later. He attached a counseling attendance receipt, a small repayment transfer for the first month, and a brief note asking for a conversation when you're ready. I replied with Nora CC'd. Keep doing these 3 things. Time will do the rest. It read warm without making promises my bones couldn't carry yet. The former student published a modest follow-up that looked more like a checklist than a headline. Trusts and P.O. boxes, identity alerts, and notarized copies, the practical spine under stories like mine. My name stayed small. 2 radio producers emailed and I declined, forwarding the invitations to Nora so the file would know I kept my voice for paper and people, not microphones. I drove to the high school auto shop with a check in Martha's name for a small scholarship. The instructor's handshake carried the clean grit of work. His students glanced from engine stands with curiosity that felt like oxygen. We talked torque specs and how you teach hands to trust eyes. I left the envelope on his desk and walked out lighter, as if I'd returned a favorite tool to its peg and found it still fit my palm. That evening, I sat at an HOA roundtable by invitation and spoke for 5 minutes about procedures that should be boring. Lock changes require notice, curb dumping harms more than property, and documentation protects everyone. I asked them to write a standard elder resident protocol so the next hard story could be handled by rule rather than rumor. The room nodded, not from guilt, but from the relief that comes when shame loses its job to a checklist. Back in the garage, I leveled the mantel clock until the tick settled like a metronome that no longer needed convincing. A fresh folder labeled Post-Closing swallowed receipts, new utility confirmations, and the buyer's contact sheet. Lemon oil lifted the smell of old varnish. The rain returned softly and tapped the roof like someone keeping time from the porch. My space read as chosen, not leftover. I locked the door and felt the deadbolt catch with an authority that didn't brag. I sent Logan a framework, simple and honest. Coffee in 90 days if the counseling continues, the payments keep landing, and the quiet holds. Email only until then. The boundary wasn't a punishment, it was a bridge with weight limits posted. He wrote back, understood, and I believed him just enough to let the future decide the rest. Dinner was simple, the kind you make when the day has done its job. I stepped outside and watched the Blue Ridge blue itself into night. The house behind me belonged to someone grateful. The garage belonged to someone steady. Grief still lived with me, but it had a chair now, not the whole table. I could sit beside it without losing my appetite. Inside, the binder's green tab glowed in lamplight like a small traffic signal that finally turned to go. I touched the envelope with the stamped copies and felt, what order can carry that outrage cannot? The deadbolt clicked true. The clock answered with its small metal heartbeat. I turned off the light and listened to a quiet that wasn't empty, a quiet built from paper, patience, and the decision to love without pretending proximity is the same thing as care. Tomorrow would not require speeches. It would require breakfast, a list, and the same steady hand. Night settles in layers, and the garage holds them gently. Lamplight warms the binder's green tab. The mantel clock keeps its unshowy promise. I sit with paper and breath and the sort of quiet that arrives only after noise stops pretending to be music. Nothing in this room is triumphant. Everything is steady. That is the shape I want my days to take. The week taught me what love is not. Love is not unlimited access dressed up as devotion. It is not a bottomless subsidy wearing a family name tag. It is not permission to treat another person's labor like tap water. Love without limits becomes appetite. Appetite without receipts becomes harm. I can write that now without shaking. The week also taught me what love is. Love shows up, but it shows up with edges. It says yes where yes builds, and nowhere no protects. It stands beside the truth and brings receipts so memory doesn't have to carry the whole load. It keeps dignity available to everyone in the room, including the person writing the checks. Martha's old line has become a rail I can hold. Boundaries are a way to love. I hear it and see 3 rails laid into the days. Title clarity, so nobody debates ownership when pressure rises. Written-only communication so feelings don't ruin the record. And life use independence so I can be alone without being abandoned. Those rails did not make me hard. They kept me human. I have learned to think in checklists because checklists refuse panic. Build a revocable trust. Keep a P.O. box for legal mail. Duplicate documents and scan them before you brag about being organized. Turn on 2-factor everywhere. Log calls with names and times. Photograph notices where they're posted. Paper before voice. That single rule saved me from speeches I would have regretted and from silences I could not prove. Another lesson arrived carrying a battery icon. A clipped video can turn a house into a stage. Feeds turn families into episodes, then reruns, then comments. The truth had an audience that mattered, and it wasn't the timeline. Counsel said, "Evidence in the file," and I obeyed. Silence in public kept my hands free to do the work that counted. Forgiveness is not a door you fling open once and walk away from. It is a verb that repeats at the speed of evidence. Logan's counseling receipts and small transfers are not decorations. They are proofs. Each proof buys a little more room for conversation and a little less room for fear. I can hold a door open without removing the hinges. Compassion that destroys the giver is not compassion. It is erasure with good manners. I accepted Kara's retraction and private apology. I honored it with paperwork, not performance. Mercy kept its spine, a small stipend, a deadline, a signed promise to stop harming. That is not cruelty. That is how adults help without volunteering for the same injury twice. The neighborhood learned too. Shame burned hot and quick. Protocol cooled it to something useful. The HOA drafted guidelines for elder-resident disputes. The article that first cleared my name became a guide for others. Relief moved across the block the way rain moves across shingles. People behave better when given steps instead of sides. Usefulness returned faster than vindication. Saturday's repair line smelled like coffee and worn copper. Hinges trusted doors again, a toaster sparked back to life, and a boy grinned like he'd seen a magic act. Small, honest work did more for my sense of self than any online declaration could. Grief kept its chair, but it stopped demanding the table. I have a posture for the road ahead. I will be steady, observant, kind, and unwilling to subsidize harm. A bridge exists between me and my son. It has posted limits, counseling, repayment, and quiet. If he keeps to them, the bridge holds. If not, the river will not get my wallet or my sleep. The house has been reframed in my mind. The main house belongs to a grateful couple who like how the light falls in the afternoon. The garage belongs to me because I chose it, not because I was left behind. Ownership did not evict tenderness. It protected it and gave it a room where panic cannot pick the lock. If a peer asked me for a credo, I could fit it on 5 lines. Prepare your papers before you need them. Speak softly, but only after you have documented. Let silence carry the weight your anger wants to lift. Give help with terms, not myths. Forgive at the speed of evidence, not nostalgia. I set Martha's photo upright and smoothed the edge where the glass cracked. The line across her smile no longer reads like a wound. It reads like a map. One route closed, another found. The clock ticks because that is its job. The lamp clicks off and leaves the outline of the bench, the binder, and the red file. The deadbolt answers with a small truth I can trust. There is a sentence I carried into this week and can carry out intact. Order over noise, love over proximity. I am not immune to sorrow, and I don't want to be. I am simply done mistaking closeness for care and drama for proof. Tomorrow will ask for lists and breakfast and maybe a hinge that needs a half turn. I will meet it with a steady hand. In the quiet after upheaval, what remains is not spectacle but shape. Order has a sound, soft as a latch settling, and resilience has a texture you can feel in your chest when the noise finally burns out. The lesson isn't that suffering is noble, it's that boundaries, patiently honored, can turn grief into ground you can stand on. We learn that love without edges becomes appetite, and that generosity, when it forgets to carry a ledger, can slide into permission. The remedy is not cynicism, it is, there is a steadier way to go on. It starts with choosing structure over impulse. Write down what matters, notarize what binds, set alerts for the doors that strangers might try, and make your future legible to yourself. Not because control solves everything, but because clarity gives dignity a place to live. A life that can point to its terms does not need to shout. It simply keeps its promises and expects others to meet it there. Forgiveness belongs in that same architecture. It isn't a grand declaration, it is a habit practiced at the speed of evidence. When remorse shows up with actions instead of alibis, forgiveness finds room. When it doesn't, patience can hold the line without turning hard. Compassion can be warm and still wear a spine. Mercy can help and still carry terms. That is not smallness. That is stewardship of time, health, and the fraction of peace each of us is given. There is wisdom in choosing a home that fits the soul you're trying to keep. Sometimes it's a smaller room, a quieter porch, a desk lamp angled toward the work that steadies you. The measure of safety is not the absence of sorrow. It is the presence of rhythm. Footsteps you trust, a clock that keeps honest time, a calendar that reflects the person you intend to be. When order replaces chaos, the heart learns to breathe in full sentences again. We also learn how thin the distance is between private lives and public stages. A clipped moment can turn a wound into a headline, but headlines don't heal. What heals is the quiet file, dates, names, photographs, and the clean language of process. The right audience for the truth is the record you keep and the people who act on it. Silence in the feed is not surrender, it is discipline, a choice to spend your breath where it can buy something real. If there is a credo worth carrying forward, it might be this: prepare your papers, speak softly after you've documented, let silence hold what anger wants to lift, give help with terms, forgive at the speed of proof. Choose a posture you can sustain, steady, observant, kind, and refuse the bargains that demand you set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. Boundaries are not walls, they are railings on steep ground. They do not keep love out, they keep it from falling. And when the dust settles, let usefulness have the last word. Fix the hinge, replace the cord, write the note that steadies a friend. Small, honest work restores a person from the edges inward. It teaches the hands to trust the eyes again. It reminds the soul that dignity isn't earned by winning arguments, but by keeping faith with your daily vows. To show up, to tell the truth, to stay gentle where you can and firm where you must. Thank you for sharing your time here. If any part of this story reached you, if a line gave you language, if a turn made you breathe a little deeper, tell us about it. We'd love to hear where you're joining from and which moment stayed with you. Your thoughts don't just react to the story, they complete it, turning lessons into a conversation that travels farther than any single voice can. If you haven't already, consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. These stories live because you bring your experiences, your questions, and your courage to the comments and make this more than a monologue. Take a second to share where you're watching from and drop the timestamp of the moment that hit the hardest for you. We read every note, and your perspective helps others find their own footing. If you prefer to linger in the quiet, that's welcome too. Save this, share it with someone who might need a steadier hand, and come back when the next turn in the road arrives. Sometimes all a person needs is permission to protect their peace and the reminder that order is not cold. Order is kindness given a plan. Until the next tale, keep your papers in order, your voice measured, and your kindness sturdy. Choose order over noise, love over proximity, and the kind of hope that signs its name where it counts. We're grateful you're here. Stay close, stay thoughtful, and we'll meet you in the very next story.